Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Michelle. Good to wake you up with a loud voice here in the auditorium. I'm with Northrop Grumman. I am the moderator for this event this evening. I'm very pleased to welcome Bob Zubrin back to the LA section podium. Bob has been here a number of times over the years. He is well known as an entrepreneur and advocate for Mars and has been such for decades, literally. And he's come tonight to talk about the new world on Mars. He has a new book out by the same name, which you can get online. It is his personal stock at the moment is sold out because I've already inquired. So, but I'm going to buy it online from Amazon, and it looks like another exciting new book. So please join me in welcoming Bob Zubrin.
Yeah. So as Jeff said, yeah, stock is sold out, one per show. I have brought some of my other books, The Case for Mars and The Case for Nukes. $20 each. Buy them, I'll sign them. They'll be worth vast amounts later because they're signed. Also, I do want to tell everybody, the Mars Society International Conference is coming up, and this year it's going to be in Los Angeles. It's going to be at the University of Southern California, October 9th through 11th. Registration is open online right now at marssociety.org. So I would encourage all of you to go there. There's going to be all sorts of great talks, lots of things, plenary speakers, and then also sessions where less prominent people, but people with original ideas are presenting their own papers on different, well, everything having to do with Mars, ranging from what is a better camera for the next Mars rover to how to terraform Mars and everything in between, human missions to Mars, etc. Anything having to do with the exploration of settlement or settlement of Mars, including both robotic and human methods, public and private methods, etc., policy. It's all going to be discussed. It's going to be quite a thing. The banquet is going to be on Friday night. The speaker there is going to be Robert Manning, who recently retired as chief engineer of JPL. Someone that I've known 4 decades of his career, starting as a rank and file engineer, moving up to and those many others. The talk I have tonight is on the settlement of Mars. And that's what I'm primarily going to talk about, the content of my new book, whose premise is that we will soon, relatively speaking, be able to send humans to Mars in large numbers. What will we make of the opportunity? Okay, so what can we create on Mars is ultimately the question here. Because sooner or later we are going to be able to settle Mars. So the question is, what does that actually mean for human civilization? However, that said, there currently is kind of a crisis in the space program. And in the here and now, and certainly during the question and answer period, we can go into that at length. I don't want to just talk about, 100 years from now. I also want to talk about now.
I saw it. I don't know where it went. The clicker.
The clicker.
That clicker.
Yep. That's the one.
This is it.
Yeah.
So right.
Yeah.
All right.
The thumb working. Thumb.
Ready for the golf club size.
There we go.
All right.
All right. So I will dwell a little bit on the current situation at the beginning, because there's also, of course, people online who and other people may not be here for the discussion at the end. So I'll talk about it a little bit now. Okay. This is the big news. Okay, SpaceX is proceeding to develop reusable heavy lift. And while this program has encountered various difficulties, it is moving forward. And, you know, the SpaceX methodology is build it, crash it, figure out what went wrong, fly it again, get a bit further into the flight envelope, crash again, solve that problem, crash again. And, you know, the Falcon 1 failed 3 times before it succeeded on the 4th flight. The Falcon 9 actually succeeded on the first flight in terms of getting things to orbit, but they did not succeed in landing the Falcon 9, making the Falcon 9 semi-reusable until 5 failures at Trump. Landing the Starship upper stage took 5 failures before it succeeded. And now what they had about 4 failures, so 5 of the heavy, the integrated system. But they'll get there. Now, so I do believe that reusable heavy lift is going to be a reality, and whether they succeed in making orbit this year or next year, well, that affects the Artemis schedule, but it doesn't affect the big picture. Very much. And I should add that the Falcon 9 has been extremely successful. I think last year they delivered about 100 of them to orbit and landed the first stage on every one of them. Which is incredible. That's equivalent one company in what the entire world was doing for launches a couple of years ago. And so it's a big thing. And as a result, there's 5 companies in China right now that are working on knockout. And exactly the same thing will happen with Starship if it is successful. And I believe that it will eventually be successful. I do not see anything fundamental about Starship that prevents it from becoming an operational system. Of course, like all aerospace systems, especially launch vehicles, it's very complex. If you make any mistake, the mission fails. People make mistakes, that's how it goes. But, you know, we look at the early flights, the Atlases and the Titans and so forth. So, same thing. Now, so there's going to be reusable launch vehicles. There's going to be reusable heavy lift launch vehicles. And, you know, as a result of the success of the Falcon 9, the cost of launch to orbit, which was essentially static at $10,000 a kilogram from about 1970 through 2010, has since fallen to about $2,000 a kilogram. That is after 40 years of stagnation, okay, it's come down by a factor of 5 as a result of the introduction of semi-reusability, that's the reusable lower stage. And fully reusable at larger scale probably will come down another factor. So we're looking at launch cost order of $500 a kilogram, something like that. Not too far off. But here's the thing. The advent of reusable launch vehicles will also introduce something else into the world that has never existed before, which is a market in used launch vehicles. Think about that. Okay, you know, new cars cost a lot of money. Okay. The average new car, and I'm talking about smaller new cars, $20,000 cars. Okay. The average per capita income on planet Earth is $10,000 a year. And yet, a lot of people own cars that cost twice as much as they make in New York. If they were new, because they don't buy them. They buy them used. You can, of course, get a fully functional used car for order of 10% the cost of a new car. So there's going to be used launch vehicles. Think about what that means. Okay. Now, but let's put that thought aside for a minute, because I do want to address the current situation before I move on into the future. Okay. The NASA Artemis program is a mess.
That's nice, that's nice, that's another.
Okay, yeah, it's a complete mess. And that is because it was basically not designed. That is, there is no design behind it. What there are, there's 5 bird flight elements. The Starship, the SLS, the Orion, the National Lander, and the Gateway, as well as a bunch of smaller stuff. That each were implemented as separate programs because there were various groups of people that wanted funding. They are that it's basically a vendor-driven program. And these pieces do not fit together. Okay, this is completely different than Apollo, where you had an overriding concept. Okay, and once they agreed on lunar orbit rendezvous was the plan, they said, okay, we need the booster, a command module, and a lunar excursion module, and they all have to fit together, and you'll build this, and you'll build this, and you'll build this, and these things will fit together, we're gonna do a mission. Okay. So that was a mission-driven, or I prefer to call it purpose-driven program. Okay, it was, okay, we had a purpose. We wanted to astonish the world with what free people could do by landing people on the moon and returning them to Earth before the decade was out. Okay, and anything that was not part of that was out the door. And there was no shortage of people in the 1960s who, when the government wanted to spend money, were right there and saying, hey, how about me? And not only that, you have a wonderful program, but you can't do it until you do my program. Okay, you can't do your program until you do my program. That's what the course says. And there were people who said that in the 1960s too. There were people who said, you can't do this until you have my space station. You can't do this until you have my nuclear rocket. You can't do this until you have my Saturn IX. Okay, and even people with winged rocket planes and stuff. Okay, and they all said, get lost. This is how we're going to do it. So Apollo spent money to do things. Artemis is doing things to spend money. Okay, and that is why it is screwed up. So we need a purpose-driven program. Now, I happen to think the purpose of the program is also it should be humans to Mars. But there are people who want to do the moon first. Musk has a mission architecture, which is coherent, but wrong. That is because he says we can do it all with Starship. One thing does it all. Okay. And in principle, that is true, but it's far from optimal. Okay, because while the Starship is very attractive as a reusable heavy lift launch and plausible as a translunar injection or trans-Mars injection vehicle with orbital refueling. Okay, it is extremely suboptimal as a lunar or Mars ascent vehicle. Okay, because it is so heavy. Okay. The Starship, send a Starship to the moon. Okay, Musk's architecture. You got to launch the Starship to orbit. Okay, fine. Now you got to launch 3 or 4 tankers to orbit to refuel it. And then that will send it on translunar injection. And now if you have to go to the Gateway, which is the wrong place to go, but if you have to go there, you go there. And then they have to launch 3 more tankers to orbit and then refuel each of them with 3 more tankers. Okay, to send them to the Gateway to refuel you, to go to the lunar surface and then back up. And so it works out it's 14 launches to do 1 lunar mission this way, which is and that, by the way, is assuming that the dry Starship only weighs 100 tons, not 120. There's no mass growth on you. Okay. And it can actually deliver a 100-ton payload to orbit. Okay, because if it was 120, you can only deliver 80, then you see the ratio of the number of tankers to the starship that you have to do to take the next step, then goes up by 50%. That just by, it's very sensitive. And so 14, it's not right. Now, would it be too bad to send Starship to lunar orbit and then have a much smaller vehicle do the up and down? Okay. Now, the ideal place to do that is not the gateway, which is 3 kilometers a second from the lunar surface and 3 kilometers a second back. Okay, 6 kilometers a second round trip, that's pretty heavy duty. Okay, low lunar orbit is only 2 down and 2 up, 4. Okay, that makes it possible to do that with a fully reusable methane oxygen lander. The national lander, of course, is an expendable lander using hydrogen oxygen. Okay, now, of course, because the reason why the national lander was awarded was because after Starship got the contract to be the human landing system, the other team with Blue, Lockheed Martin, and some others said, we want a contract too, and if we don't get it, we're going to hate you. And so they gave them a contract, and so I can't blame NASA for that. The pressure was on them from the outside. However, what NASA should have done, having already decided to fund Starship, is insist that the national lander use the same propellant combination. So that you have Starship plus Starboat using a common propellant combination. Since getting Starship to lunar orbit requires in-space propellant transfer anyway, now you have this made compatible. Starship plus Starboat does it all. Okay, and now you have something, and Starboat is something 10 to 20% the size of Starship, perhaps something even that looks a lot like a Starship launched as an upper stage on a Falcon 9. That gives you a fully reusable medium lift capability. You can use it for that purpose, which would be interesting. But also, it's the thing that can go up and down 4 kilometers a second from an orbiting Starship tanker to the surface. Okay, and this would increase the number of lunar missions you could do per Starship launch by about a factor of 5, which is a lot. Now, here's the interesting thing. Okay, Musk, of course, his goal, which is my goal, is humans to Mars. Starship uses methane oxygen because methane oxygen is the easiest propellant combination to make on the surface of Mars. You can make it from water and CO2, both which are available on Mars. And this I discuss a lot in my book, The Case for Mars. It's the basis of my Mars Direct mission. Okay, so Musk adopted it too. Good. However, once again, the Starship weighs 100 tons, not 20 tons that my Earth return vehicle in Mars Direct weighed. Okay, so instead of needing 100 kilowatts on the surface, 600 kilowatts on the surface, which is 13 football fields of solar panels, which is a lot. And which, by the way, would weigh about 240 tons. And okay, and you have to get the dust over it, all that, and keep them. So that's bad, right? However, the delta V to go from Mars surface to orbit is 4 kilometers to surface. The delta V to go from Mars orbit to surface is almost 0. So 4 kilometers a second, 2 down, 2 up, Starboat to the moon. 4 kilometers a second, up and down or down and up, to Starboat on Mars. And so I believe that the correct mission architecture for both Moon and Mars is the same, which is Starship with Starboat. Okay, now I talked with Musk about this years ago. He didn't like it. He said, prove to me why I need it. I can do it all with Starship. Okay, well, fine. Okay, NASA needs it. So I think what they ought to do, frankly, is tell the national team, look, you can have your money, but you gotta build what we, which is this. Okay, that is rewrite the contract. and get the Starboat from them, Starship from SpaceX, and you got yourself an orbit ship. That would make sense. Anyway, back to the future. Reusable launch vehicles, used launch vehicles. Okay, now Musk told me a number of years ago that he could build the Starship, that is the upper stage, the part that would actually go to Mars, for $10 million. Which means that either he or one of the copycats that will make comparable systems once this is proven to be a viable technology, would probably be willing to sell them for 20. Which means that eventually used ones will be available for 2. Now, if a Starship can transport 100,000 people, excuse me, 100 people to Mars, okay. $2 million divided by 100 people is $20,000 per person. So what I'm saying to you is that the day is going to come when there's going to be a market in used launch vehicles, used Starships, or Chinese version of Starship, or maybe Blue or Relativity or somebody, Australians, you name it, is going to have theirs, and that there'll be used versions available for a few $1 million, and that means that you've got a group of people that want to establish their own colony on Mars, $20,000 per person. Okay, that's a lot more than I've ever paid for an airplane flight. And I just want to make it clear to United that I will not pay that for an airplane. It's really a very doable sum for someone who's willing to cash in his chips. Okay. It's actually a much lower amount of money relative to incomes today than a passage to the New World was in the 1700s. Much lower. People paid for passage to the New World in the 1700s. If you were a working man and didn't have the money to pay for fare, you would offer 7 years' work as an indentured servant, which would be like $350,000 today in terms of labor equivalent. So it's going to become possible for people to move to Mars if they really want to. And now, to get to that time, I do think there needs to be an intermediate phase before there's settlement, there's exploration, and this will be largely government sponsored for a while until certain things happen, which I'll get into. But in the course of doing expeditions to Mars and establishing scientific bases on Mars, we will develop many of the technologies needed to live on Mars. And these technologies will, of course, be then used by those who choose to settle. All right, now.
Wrong way.
We could change it so we can see it,
Okay,
maybe.
all right.
Um,
So the question then is, okay, what's Martian society going to be like? I'm asking these questions all the time, like,
It's already.
what's the government going to be on Mars? So forth. And I have certain ideas that I prefer. Elon Musk has certain ideas that he prefer. But our preferences are irrelevant here. And even the preferences of the Martian settlers themselves are only influential but not decisive. The thing that will decide this is natural selection. That is, the forms of government that prevail on Mars will be those that work the best. Okay, and so, and various other things that we'll discuss. That is, there will be, in my view, not one giant city on Mars, Muskopolis, or Terminus, as he calls it, unfortunate name. for reasons that we can get into. But there will be many small colonies founded by people with very diverse ideas of what the ideal society will be. And the ones that become the dominant form of Martian civilization will be those that outgrow the rest. Those that prosper the most, those that draw the most immigrants, those that can make the most use of the talents of their immigrants. Those will be ones that outgrow the rest. Okay, this will be settled by natural selection. Now, I want to discuss the issue of resources. And by the way, I discussed this a lot in my book, The Case for Nukes, which is over there. People say, what are the natural resources of Mars? There are no natural resources. Just as there are no natural resources on Earth. There is no such thing as a natural resource. Nothing. Okay. There's only natural materials. And it is human ingenuity manifested as technology that turns a material into a resource. Okay. Uranium was not a resource until we invented nuclear power. Okay. Oil was not a resource until we invented oil drilling and refining and machines that could run on the product. If you went to a meeting of the General Staff Napoleon Bonaparte that was contemplating invading a country and seizing its resources, oil would not have been on the list. Okay, oil was just this stuff that came out of the ground once in a while and ruined your farm. And stuck the place up. Okay, certainly aluminum would not have been a resource, or uranium, obviously, and deuterium is not considered a resource today, but will be once we have fusion. Land wasn't even a resource until people invented agriculture. Land was not a resource. Okay. That's why the Indians thought that Peter Minuit was a fool when they sold him Manhattan for $24. This is what, okay, sure. Nothing here. Okay, and and well, to take another example to be concrete, historically, metals have been considered a resource as the primary material for making tools, right? Well, look at this. For the first 4,000 years of human civilization, known as the Bronze Age, the metals that people actually used were copper, tin, zinc, lead, silver, gold. Okay, all low temperature metals. Okay, and they collectively amount to 100 parts per million in the Earth's crust. There are places that are local concentrations, but still, in terms of their global prevalence, they're quite small. But then around 1200 BC, the Hittites developed hotter kilns that could smelt iron. Okay, which is whatever that number, 50,000 parts per million in the Earth's crust. So all of a sudden, there's a total massive revolution in the Earth's metal resources. All of a sudden, iron, which was previously dirt, becomes a resource. And now, instead of, if you read Homer, the only warriors that count are the kings, because they have armor, because it's made of bronze, extremely expensive. Okay. In the next millennia, iron weapons become common, and you get mass armies with citizen soldiers with swords and all this kind of stuff, but not just for military purposes. You get iron to be used now to make farmers' implements, axes and plows. And all of a sudden, huge amounts of land that previously was not cultivable, whatever it is.
Cultivatable.
Cultivatable, became so. You could plow heavier soils, you could chop down forests that previously were incredibly hard to chop down. And so the available areas for agriculture greatly expand because of this invention. And then aluminum. Aluminum is not known to science until 1820. And it doesn't become a significant thing that people use until the 20th century. Because you can't separate aluminum from aluminum oxide using thermal techniques. It takes electricity. So only a society capable of wielding electricity can actually have aluminum. Okay, that's why if you go into any real Old West antique store, you will not find a single object made of aluminum. Okay. But here it is, it's so common today, we make Coke cans out of it their own way. But of course, we also use it to make airplanes and things like that. Now, and then silicon, all of its potentials also. Okay, so once again, it is technology that defines what is a resource and what isn't. All right, so Mars has no resources on it now, but it will be once there are resourceful people there. Okay, now, of course, to do these transformations of matter requires energy. And there are no fossil fuels on Mars, and if there were, they still would not be useful because for fossil fuels to be useful, you have to burn them with oxygen. So basically, to separate things into both reducing and oxygen stuff. Okay, so there's none of that. Wind power is weak, solar energy is weak, won't be hydroelectric power on Mars until after the planet is terraformed. Okay, so what you're going to have to use is nuclear power. Now, here's an important issue. Okay, we can make nuclear reactors today that are sufficient for supporting human expeditions to Mars, including making the methane oxygen needed for the return trip, especially for using Starship. So then you only need 50 tons of propellant instead of 500 tons, 600. But the kinds of nuclear reactors that we use on Earth today, over 90% of them are the basically pressurized water reactors. They're essentially modified versions of the reactor that Rick overbuilt in the Nautilus in 1954. Okay. And there are people that criticize our pressurized water reactors because they are a 1950s design. I do not sympathize with that position. I think the reason why they are a 1950s design is because it was a good design. But the but nevertheless, they do have a number of important limitations. And one of which is they only get about 1% of the energy out of the uranium that they use. Now, we can tolerate that easily, because in fact, the cost of the uranium fuel used in a nuclear reactor is only 5% the cost of the electricity. Okay, that's how great uranium is as fuel. Or except for two things. Now, with a breeder reactor, you could get 90% of the energy out of the uranium. Okay, 2 orders of magnitude more energy out of the uranium. Okay, why don't we do that? Well, because first of all, if you went to a utility and say, hey, here's my design for a breeder reactor, why don't you use it, save money on your fuel? He says, look, I don't care about that. Fuel is only 5% of my cost. My main cost is the capital cost, which in fact has been greatly expanded due to hyperregulation. And, you know, let me tell you something, kid. I have enough problems getting the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to approve a reactor of the same design that has been used by everybody since 1954. If I come along with a breeder reactor, it's not going to take me 3 years or 10 years. It'll take me 40 years to get it approved. And this is going to cost vastly more than you're saving me on the fuel. So get lost, all right? Now, so now also one reason also is that the fuel itself is relatively cheap because we have a established global transportation network. And so if you have to mine uranium on the other side of the world in some faraway place, there's a whole transport network to get it to you or to get it to places where it is then refined and then gotten to you and so forth. Okay. Martians, while they first explorers will undoubtedly use reactors that also, they might not be pressurized water reactors, but they'll be reactors that operate on similar processes and only get 1% of the energy out of the fuel. That's quite possible. But once you settle Mars, they're not going to want to. If you have to make your fuel on Mars, and if you have to mine it from places relatively close to your city because you do not have a global transportation system that we have on Earth. And so you're going to have to be producing your uranium fuel or thorium perhaps out of much less lower quality ore. Okay. And you don't also have this massive global industrial infrastructure and division of labor to do the refining and isotope separation and all that stuff for you. You're going to say, no, I want a breeder reactor. I don't want to take the 2 water magnitude hit. And especially since if you're a Martian, you won't be so willing to accept having a regulatory bureaucracy that makes it 5 times harder to build the reactor than it needs to be. That is, the Nautilus reactor was built in 3 years, along with the submarine to go with it. And then the first civilian reactor based on that, the Shippingport reactor in 57 was also built in 3 years. Now it takes 16 years to build a reactor in the United States. So you won't have the patience for that. So if the capital costs are down, the fuel costs are up, you're going to want to get the more efficient reactor. Now you're going to want to even go beyond that, because on Mars, deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen, is 5 times as common as it is on Earth. And deuterium is much easier to separate from light hydrogen than U-235 is from U-238. Because U-235, which is fissile uranium, which is 0.7% uranium, it only differs by 1.5% in weight from the other stuff. Okay, whereas deuterium differs by a factor of 2. So it's much easier to do the separation. Also, any life support system, the recycling system that you have always involves a water electrolysis step. And that separates the hydrogen from oxygen in water, which is the most energy intensive step of deuterium enrichment from light hydrogen, because you have to electrolyze all this water. So since you're going to be electrolyzing the water anyway, and since you've got deuterium rich water, you're going to want fusion. Okay. And so I believe that the Martians are going to be driven not just to develop breeder reactors, but to develop fusion reactors. And this brings me to an important point about Martian civilization, is that it's going to be based on invention. Okay. And now, a good analogy for this is America. Okay. The steamboat. Okay. The British invented the steam engine, and they used it to pump water out of coal mines. But you see, if you are using steam engines to pump waters out of coal mines, they do not have to be compact and they do not have to be efficient. You have an infinite supply of fuel present right at the place where you're using them. Okay, and they can be laid out, and they can be as heavy and as they need to be, and as inefficient as they need to be. Americans, the only viable highways in early America were the rivers. And the sailboats don't do that well on rivers. Okay, so Americans came up with the idea. Well, they didn't come up with the idea. There were people in Europe who already were thinking about this, but they were driven to implement the idea of applying steam to boats. Okay. And in fact, the first steamboat that was ever built is called the Perseverance, just like the current Mars rover, and was demonstrated to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787. Okay. It, however, was not a commercial success. The first commercial successful steamboat was the Claremont, which is the thing you see in that picture there, the famous Claremont, which, by the way, was financed by Robert Livingston, who is the person who arranged the Louisiana Purchase for Thomas Jefferson in France, and who had very large land holdings west of the Appalachians and wanted to develop. And so he wanted transport that could effectively do the Ohio and Mississippi River. Okay, so he financed Robert Fulton, built the steamboat Claremont. It was a big success. But then that set off a race for better steamboats. And the thing is, steamboat has to carry its own fuel. So you need to make it efficient. You can't carry an infinite amount of coal or wood on your ship to fuel it. And furthermore, it has to be relatively compact compared to the requirement for a steam engine that is pumping water out of coal mines. Okay, so you're driven to more compact, more efficient, high pressure steam engines, which then enable railroads, which become the transformative invention of the 19th century. They completely changed the world. Okay. And so steam engines, steamboats, railroads, this revolutionizes the world in the 19th century and driven by the requirements of the frontier. Same with Mars. The Martians are going to be driven. Okay, yeah, there's thinking around fusion power on Earth right now, but there's no drive behind it. There's no necessity. You have these other ways to do it. The Martians are going to need it. They're going to want it. They're going to make it happen. Okay, and guess what? Once you have fusion reactors, there's other things you can do with them besides make electric power. You can make fusion rockets, okay, which can have exhaust velocities as high as 7% the speed of light. Now, with forced engineering, you can generally make a rocket achieve about twice its exhaust velocity. That is, Earth to orbit is like 9 kilometers a second, which is twice the exhaust velocity of a hydrogen-oxygen engine. So we're talking about creating rockets that could achieve up to 10% light speed, which is an introductory capability for interstellar travel. Okay. Now, of course, it won't initially be used for that, but it will be used to greatly facilitate Earth-Mars transportation and to open up the asteroid belt and the outer solar system. Now, furthermore, more broadly understood, the point I'm making is a culture of invention, okay, which we had in early America, very much so. The American inventor is actually a popular stereotype. From Benjamin Franklin, Samuel Morse, Edison, the Wright brothers, okay, it's a cultural stereotype. And there's a reason why it is, okay? There's a reality behind it. You have magazines like Popular Mechanics, Popular Science, founded in the 1830s to be a medium of communication of this culture of backyard tinkerers, okay, who are making these inventions. But actually, there's a historian named Bernard Bailyn wrote a book called Voyagers to the West, in which he went over the record of the British had in the 1750s. The British were actually keeping good records of who it was that was emigrating to America from Britain. Okay, and it wasn't the London slum population, and it wasn't the rich. Okay, now there's a fair amount of farmers, but that's because farmers were overwhelmingly a very large percent of the British population. But the group that is outsized in that outsized cohort in the immigrants from England to America in the 1750s are people like carpenters, blacksmiths, stonemasons, glaziers, craftsmen. Okay. And you think about it, if you have a place where new towns are built, that's where those guys are going to go. And those are also the kinds of people, makers, if you will, who will then lead to the creation of this culture of invention in America. Which we have. Now, and furthermore, now these inventions that the Martians make, They will make them to meet their own needs, but then they will license them on Earth. And this will be one of the primary income streams of Mars. Basically selling, licensing IP generated on Mars to Earth. And this will be one of the primary benefits, material benefits that Earth gets from Mars, which is a new creative culture, adding its inventive capacities to human progress overall. Okay, that, people, Musk says we need to go to Mars so that we can have a place where there's some survivors when Earth is destroyed. And that's why he calls his colony Terminus after the foundation, the book Foundation, where the scientists built the colony on planet Terminus so that when the Galactic Empire is destroyed, they can reestablish civilization. I think this is not intelligent. I mean, the Foundation books are great books, by the way. I really love Foundation.
As a boss.
Yeah, that's great stuff. But first of all, it's not valid because if Earth civilization collapsed, the Martian colony would survive. Okay. The Martian colonies want to be as self-sufficient as it can, but it cannot be an autark. Okay. But also, I just think it's repellent. It's kind of like it's not Foundation, it's the Mask of the Red Death. That is, the Edgar Allan Poe story where the people want to survive the plague, so they all go to the Kennedy party while everybody outside dies. No, okay, it's the wrong rationale for going to Mars. Going to Mars is to establish new branches of human civilization that will add their creative capacities to human progress over. Okay. Now, so that's one of the main income streams for Mars. Now, there's another. There's several. I'm going to discuss three. The second is the asteroid belt. Okay, the asteroid belt. Everybody's heard about the precious metals rich ores in the asteroids. Okay, and there's people who want to go after them. Well, the thing is this, is as a place to support asteroid mining operations, Mars has a 2 order of magnitude advantage compared to the Earth, both because of its lower gravity and because of its position. And you can see that in this chart where I show that if you have a starship in low Earth orbit to go to Ceres in the main asteroid belt, it's 9.5 kilometers a second, it would have no cargo. In fact, it couldn't do it, empty. Whereas a starship going from low Mars orbit to the belt could take 200 tons. So the way you get rich from a gold rush is not by mining gold. It's selling blue jeans and shovels to gold miners. Okay, this is why San Francisco is still there long after the California gold rush ended. Okay, and while there's probably people in this room wearing blue jeans today. Yeah, I can see one. So Mars is going to be to the asteroids what San Francisco was to the California 40 years, or what Seattle was to the Yukon. And anything that can be made on Mars that's needed to support asteroid mining operations will be made on Mars. Okay. Okay, so that's the second income stream. And a third is real estate development. That is, once you have colonies on Mars that are established for purposes that we've already discussed, they become places that can turn land, which is worthless, into real estate. In other words, the land is only worth something, well, if you can get to it, and if you can have certain necessary things needed like electricity, plumbing, water supply, etc. So for instance, here, even in the United States today, there's places you can go where you can get land extremely cheap, okay, because it has no infrastructure supporting it. And on Mars, the land will be extremely cheap. But if you have someone who can extend infrastructure into this, then you can transform land into real estate that has value. Now, in the settlement of the West, once again, we see a lot of this stuff. Okay, the question of like where the railroad went to would determine which land became more valuable. Okay, so, and there were, of course, all sorts of scams where people would sell land based on inside information that the railroad's gonna come through here. Okay, right? And so here you see a couple being sold some land by a salesman who's telling them this is where the future beachfront property is gonna be after terraforming. And the great thing about terraforming is there's a lot of places you could have beachfront. How much water you create, and but no, so fortunes will be made and lost in this process. Okay, but the development will occur because once someone actually owns the land, then they have an incentive to push for the various, in other words, once you own the land, you are going to do things to make the railroad company. Okay, so, and some people succeed at that. Now. There's lots of ideas that people have for the architecture of Martian cities. Now, if you look at the architecture of the Martian city in the movie Total Recall, you'll see that it is a dump. Now, I don't
Not all of
what?
it, not all of it.
Okay.
But
Okay.
a lot of
All right, but the thing is, you see,
it.
once again, great movie, but, that Martian cities will be in a de facto competition for immigrants. Okay, you know, whether they know it or not, they are, because the ones that outgrow the others will be the ones that prevail in terms of the dominant form. Okay, so they have to be attractive to immigrants. And this will affect many things, as we'll discuss, including their political institutions, but also architecture. Okay. Martian cities, the ones that prevail will need to be beautiful. Okay. And once again, there's a parallel here, although it's not exact, to the colonization of America, which is why are we having this meeting in English today as opposed to French? Okay. Because in the 16 and 1700s, France had 4 times the population of England. Why did England prevail in North America and not the French? It is because British women went to North America and French women did not. Because the English colonies, many of them, were set up with the notion of creating complete institutions with schools, churches, all these things that go into having a complete community, whereas the French outposts were set up as for-profit fur trade posts. Okay, and as a result, British women were willing to go to North America and French women were not. And as a result of that, by the time the struggle came to its decisive phase in the 1750s, there were 2 million English-speaking people in North America and 50,000 French. That's what happened. Okay, so women will choose to go to places that aren't dumps. And,
Not Venus.
and that's what's gonna be a very influential factor in the decision. Now, there's all sorts of ways you can make a city not a dump, and in the book, which you can get on Amazon, discuss a variety of things. There's a number of approaches, but nevertheless, that needs to be kept in mind. And there's some discussion of it in the book too, but I don't have time for it now. Okay. I've already mentioned that Mars is going to be based on innovation, which means that Mars are going to need to be free societies, and I'll discuss that more in a bit. But there's another thing that Martian societies will need to have, which is to some degree in tension with freedom. Okay, which is the need for social solidarity. I am not a person who's ever had, I'm very much an individualist. I've had very little use in my life to organize sports, let alone organize religion. But but I think that Mars colonies will need to have both, to some extent. That is, they'll need to have, while there will need to be free societies, there will need to be a sense of solidarity in the community and institutions that promote that. And for example, okay, well, to look at it more broadly, I do not believe that a Mars colony, a successful Mars colony, can be multicultural. I think it'll have to have a common culture. Within it, there could be different ones in different colonies, yes, but within one, no. Now, there's two ways that can be achieved. One is you could draw all of your colonies from one particular group on Earth. That could succeed, but your colony will be small. I think that the ones that succeed is the ones that can implement an effective melting pot, where they can draw people from all cultures, but create out of many one. And this, by the way, is a photograph of the New York City school in 1892. And these are mostly immigrant kids from Italy or Southern Europe. And you can see they're being turned into Americans. And that was the process. Education. Mars is going to face a severe labor shortage, as we did in the American frontier. And there's going to be a need for education to allow people to participate as skilled labor that can use the most advanced technology. On the other hand, there's going to be need for to make maximum use of the labor available. Okay, now we do not do that in the United States today. Okay, far from it. We have created here. Okay, there's a lot of things to like about the American university system. It does produce a lot of very skilled people, but there's also things not to like about. We have created a system in the United States where basically we oppress the uncertified. There's all sorts of professions that people are fully capable of doing that they are excluded from doing because they don't have the necessary certificates, which require years of formal education to get. And it's a cost of money and it's a cost of lost opportunity. And it's basically a gigantic poll tax. I don't think Mars can afford that. I also think that you can't afford to basically put youth in reservations for 22 years or longer of their lives, excluding them from the community workforce. So I think there's going to be a great deal of participation in work of children and teenagers and so forth. And as they grow up, they'll so forth. And also, well, this is a complex subject. Why do I have a picture there of a World War II truck? Okay, there's a reason why. Okay. Because in the 1940s and that time period, okay, not many people had college educations, but there was a high degree of public literacy. I know this, my own father was an orphan who worked his way through high school selling newspapers, but he knew his Shakespeare cold. Really. And now, there's nothing ideal about that society, but what I'm saying is that we've created a distinction between the learned and the unlearned defined by universities and removal from the workforce for a rather extended period of someone's life. And I think the Martian societies want to get past that. They want to have the whole society be a university. We're going to want to have more open intellectual participation in ways that we don't have here. And it's a complex subject. I don't have time to lay it out, but there was a time in the United States where people came to public lectures, public debates, the Lincoln Douglas debates. People came 3 days away to come there and hear it and picnic while they heard these orators discuss the most advanced concepts of political science, and so forth. And so, well, I think that you're going to need to have an intellectual culture, but not isolated within a university. That's what I mean. Okay, I've already mentioned things like sports and dancing. These anthropologists will tell you about. There's a great book called The Weirdest People in the World. I recommend it. That discusses various social customs from an anthropological point of view. These things, the reason why almost all societies have these is because they reinforce social science. But of course, on Mars, they can take some very novel forms. All right, so yeah, the issue of freedom. Okay, so the need for social solidarity will be in tension with the need for liberty. The Martian colonies will need to be highly inventive, which means they will need to be free. And also freedom is important for attracting immigrants.
I'm gonna go this to you so you can see this.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Oh, thanks. Once again, the science fiction common plot of the extraterrestrial tyranny, it makes for a great movie because, if you have a tyranny, then you're going to have the brave revolutionaries and you're off to the races in terms of your storyline. But the idea of an extraterrestrial tyranny, while possible, is unsustainable because no one would want to immigrate to it. So if an extraterrestrial colony became a tyranny, it would die on the vine, could not attract immigrants. Oh. Wow. Okay, terraforming. Terraforming is for the future, but I think it will be on the minds of Martians from the very early stages, long before it becomes technically possible. That is, once you're there and you're seeing this and you're imagining what it could be. And so Mars is going to be terraformed in the mind before it's terraformed in fact, but eventually will be terraformed in fact. Once human societies on Mars become technologically potent enough to do it. Because it is the nature of life to transform sterile environments into fertile ones. That's why life has been a success. And so, but I believe this vision of that humans will have for what they can do on Mars will be prominent in their thought. And this is interesting because it transforms people's thoughts about what people are. Right now, there is a current of thought that is quite common in our society, which is that humans are the enemies of life. Okay, that we are destroying the earth because we've destroyed the earth. Okay, well, with this vision in mind, people will understand that humans are not the enemies of life. Humans are the vanguard. And this is important. See, look, if you view the humans as a cancer upon the universe, you don't give freedom to a cancer. Okay, you destroy cancer, you restrict it, destroy. If you view humans as fundamentally a negative phenomenon, then the role of government must be to restrict and reduce human activity and liberty. On the other hand, if you realize, and this is true, that the average person is more of a creator than a destroyer. See, if that was not true, there'd be nothing here. If the average person destroyed more than they created, then over time, we will have built nothing. Okay, the average person must be more of a creator than destroyer. That's why we've managed to create this incredible global civilization. Okay, but this is even more apparent on Mars, where you're starting with a tabula rasa. And if you understand that is the role of people, to be creators, then the role of government, instead of being to reduce human numbers, activities, and liberties, it must be to protect human freedom at all times. Now, here's a quote from Lincoln, 1858. Okay. The house divided itself cannot stand. I believe the government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect to seize it will be divided. It will become all one or all the other. Now, earlier in the talk, I said that the labor shortage on Mars will force Mars to become a free society, developing advanced technology, etc. And it did that in America as well, but only in one part. In the other part, there was another way that they dealt with the labor shortage. Okay, that is, the founders said we're going to do a noble experiment here in America, and they did. But in fact, there were two experiments done in America, broadly speaking, and one was not very noble at all. Okay, because one, yes, dealt with the challenge of the frontier and the challenge of limited labor availability to deal with the frontier through freedom, technology, skilled, educated labor, etc. The other dealt with it through slavery. Okay, that's how it was. And as Lincoln said, they could not coexist. Now, this painting, I think, should be familiar to most people here. This is the surrender of the Confederates at Appomattox on April 9th, 1865, exactly 87 years to the day before I was born. Now, the thing here is this. If you ask any American Civil War buff, why did the North win the Civil War? Okay. They will say, well, it's because the North had a much larger population and more industry. And that is true. But then you have to ask the question, why did the North have a much larger population and more industry? And that is because it was free. All the immigrants, or almost all, went to the North because it was a free society. Okay. The Union Army was 40% immigrants and first generation Americans, Confederates 3%. So the talent all went to the North. Okay, and the industry was all created there. And I think that this is why freedom will prevail on Mars for the same reason. It's not that it's impossible for unfree societies to be founded on Mars. Okay, but I believe the free societies founded there will outgrow and overpower the others. And it doesn't necessarily have to come to direct conflict, but in terms of competition, etc., they will prevail. And furthermore, because they will prevail, because freedom will prevail on Mars and in space, okay, this will greatly enhance the power of free societies broadly, including on. Okay, I mean, look, Why is SpaceX an American company? Why isn't there a SpaceX in Russia? Okay, despite the fact that there are people in Russia with large concentrations of capital who believe in human expansion into space, but nobody has founded a SpaceX there. Why? Because if you did and it was successful, it would be stolen by somebody in the Kremlin. Exactly. Okay, and look, you have this more challenging domain of space has been opened up. Okay, well, like, you even go back further in history. Whenever a new challenging domain is opened up, it always benefits the more liberal society. When the oceans were opened up, the dominant sea powers are always the more liberal societies. You go back to Athens, Venice, Holland, the British, etc. Okay, is the leading sea powers of air. Okay, while air power was exploited first seriously by the Germans and Japanese, by the end of World War II, the Anglo-Americans had far outdone them in achievement in aviation. And then more recently, space. Okay, the Soviets were first into space, Sputnik and Gagarin. All right, but who ultimately prevailed? Okay, Apollo, yes, it was done as a government program, but it took advantage of the creativity of a free society in order to rapidly outpace whatever the Soviets could do in space. And then more recently, SpaceX. And and as we make these inventions opening up space, okay, this well, it both puts the stamp of freedom on space and it will put it on Mars, but it also enhances the power of the free nations back home. Okay, just as the sea power enhanced the power of Britain. Okay, the fact that we are created SpaceX and we're going to create other spacefaring companies and we'll create, they'll become independent soon enough, but nevertheless, they will be created as free societies on Mars, and thus the future is free. And then finally, okay. Well, look, you know, in the previous slide, Lincoln saying, house divided cannot stand. It must become all one or all the other. Okay, the slave owners lost that war, but the earth today is a house divided, isn't it? It's half free and half unfree. And we're coming into a confrontation. Okay, and this confrontation is being driven by a false idea. Okay, a false idea that the future is closed, that resources are limited. See, because the idea that resources are limited, okay, implies that war is necessary. And the idea that war is necessary supports tyrants. Okay, because the thesis that tyranny is necessary is because war is necessary. I mean, this is the ultimate thesis supporting, for instance, the Putin regime. Okay, that we must accept tyranny because Russia must be strong because we are surrounded by enemies because war is inevitable. Okay, and in fact, the tyrants themselves promote this view because it's what supports them. And this idea that resources are limited, this has been the source of the major catastrophes of the 20th century. Hitler, okay, the laws of I'm quoting Hitler right now. The laws of existence require unlimited killings so that the better may live. Germany needs living space. Okay, and there were similar ideas underlying the rush towards World War I. Now that was false. Germany did not need living space. Germany today is smaller than the Third Reich and has a much higher standard of living despite having a larger population. Why? Not because they were successful invading other countries and killing everybody and stealing their cows. Okay, they were unsuccessful in that. But because of the advance of technology, which has been a global project, which Germans did contribute to for sure, but so did many people that they were trying to exterminate. And had they been successful in that project, they and everyone would be much poorer today because of the loss of that creativity. Okay, so what I'm saying here is this. Is I alluded to it a little bit in the slide on terraforming. Is this idea, defeating this idea that humans are in competition for scarce resources, because humans are destroyers of the limited bounty that is there. Rather, that's what sets nations against each other. That's what supports the thesis that war is necessary. That's what supports the thesis that tyrants are necessary or useful. Okay, if you undermine that, okay, if you show that resources are fundamentally unlimited because humans are fundamentally creators. And the more people there are and the better educated and equipped they are and the freer they are, okay, the more resources we're going to have. Okay, and so there's no reason killing each other over provinces when by rising to our higher selves, we can create planets. And that ultimately is the case for Mars. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Bob, for a provocative and entertaining talk, to say the least. We do have time for questions. We do have a very hard stop at 7:30, and Ken has to basically take everything down a few minutes before that. So I think we have time for probably 20 to 30 minutes of questions. We have folks online and we have people here in the room. I'll start with the room. Anybody here in the room have a question for Bob? Oh, come on. Yes.
About midway, thank you. Bob, about midway through the talk, you started talking about resources on Mars. And you had in the top line plastics and fabrics. And you spoke about ores relating to nuclear material, whether uranium, plutonium. Would we not have to import? Is there any evidence of ores on Mars? Well, for lack of a better term, ores on Mars that contain uranium, plutonium, or things that we would need to create nuclear reactors?
Okay, all right, so to clarify. Okay. Plastics and fabrics are things obviously that you create. There's no plastics that, now we have plastics on Earth that you can combine. But there weren't originally. They are created out of water and CO2 if you have energy. Now ores, of course, Mars is red because it's extremely rich in iron ore. And there's plenty of silicon and aluminum and all that kind of stuff. There has been discoveries of uranium and thorium at concentrations up to 2%, which is reasonable. It's not the richest we have on Earth, but it can be used. But yes, but that was the point that on Earth, we can make use of the richest uranium ores from the Congo or wherever they're from, because we've got this global transportation system. Okay, if you had to only use the uranium that is within 30 miles of Los Angeles, you'd be restricted to much poorer selection of ore, which is why you want to go to a higher technology, such as, for instance, breeder reactors to get better use. You're going to have to work harder to make your uranium. You're going to want to use it more efficiently. Now, one thing that does exist on Mars everywhere is water, and it is 5 times more rich in deuterium than it is on Earth. So that is why the Martians will, if they stick with fission, they'll want to go to breeder reactors, but also that really the holy grail for Mars is going to be fusion.
Great, thank you.
So let me read some questions that have been sent in online. Bob, Seabold or Cybold, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, Bob, has asked, would someone please ask about the significant radiation levels on Mars, including cosmic rays, solar particle events of an atmosphere, and lack of a magnetic field?
Okay, sure. All right. The Martian atmosphere, as thin as it is, if you're looking straight up to the zenith, you've got about 16 grams per square centimeter of material above you. That's equivalent to 16 centimeters, about 6 inches of water, which is as thick as you would put in a solar flare storm shelter. However, if you average it over the 2 pi steradians of the dome of the sky, because things coming at you not just straight down, but every direction, it's more like 65 grams per square centimeter, 10 feet of water, which is therefore enough to shield you against solar flares. This is very important for doing agriculture on the surface of Mars compared to the moon, where we do not have this protecting you. So that lunar greenhouses would have to be lit by artificial light because they would have to be underground, unless you can make glass that is a foot thick, something like that. Whereas on Mars, you can use thin wall greenhouses. Now, cosmic rays, of course, are not stopped by the Martian atmosphere. They are half those of interplanetary space because you have Mars under you blocking out half the sky. It's the same reason why cosmic ray doses on the space station are half of those in interplanetary space. Cosmic rays are not blocked by the Earth's magnetic field. They are blocked by the Earth, which is blocking out half the sky under the space station. Okay. Now, these doses, as can be seen, are not prohibitive for people who routine stay on the space station is 6 months. Some have stayed much longer than that, and there have been no radiological casualties. Now, you can say, okay, well, that's a limited population. Would you really want to expose your whole population to doses of those characters? I mean, in other words, the doses that we've seen on the space station are comparable to Earth to Mars transit, that kind of thing, which is why the radiation, cosmic rays, are not a showstopper for missions to Mars. Now, if you're saying, what about a colony where everyone's exposed to this, including children that are growing up and are therefore more vulnerable to radiation? Older people are much less vulnerable. I'm completely. You want to reduce the dose, and the way you reduce the dose is you would have your city laid out as follows: is most of the habitation is below ground. Okay, and and then you can go upstairs into the part under the dome that's outdoors. Now that is exposed to cosmic radiation, but think about this. How much of your day do you spend outside? Okay. If you're a real outdoor person, maybe 5 hours. That's 20% of the day. Most people spend much less of their time on average outside than that. 2 hours? That's 10% of the day. Okay, so if you're sleeping person and your indoor stuff is underground and it's only sort of your outdoor activity that is above ground in the dome, you're taking a radiation dose, which is 1/5 or 1/10 that of someone on the space station. Okay, which in turn is half of that in interplanetary space. And so that dose is not going to have a significant effect. A bigger question, which I admit is an open question right now, is the effect of lower gravity on human physiology over time, because there's no way around that. We don't know. I mean, there's no real reason to believe there'll be any problem on a human Mars mission of extended exposure to 1/3 gravity. But what about the development of children and their physiology and so forth in 1/3 gravity? This is something we're gonna have to find out by doing it. And, you know, my hypothesis is it'll be okay. My hypothesis is that people born and raised on Mars will do fine on Mars, and they'll find going to Earth very unpleasant. And so they won't in general. But, you know, for the first couple of 100 years of America, very few people that came to America ever went back to Europe. Really, frankly, it's only in the 20th century that we start getting two-way travel in terms of people. And then other than sailors, of course. But yeah, so that part's an open question.
Thank you, Bob. You just answered Martin McLaughlin's question, which was about galactic cosmic rays at 1/3 gravity. So we're gonna go back to the room and Michael has a question.
Hello, Robert, it's good to see you again. I'm wondering, is there a case for the moon and what role is the moon gonna have in inhabiting Mars? Thank you.
Well, I think that a society, I think Mars is the place to go. I think that by going to Mars, by creating this architecture that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, or near the beginning of my talk, of Starship plus Starboat, because you both the moon and Mars. Basically, the hardware set that allows us to go to Mars will also allow us to go to the moon, but it's a secondary objective. It really is. I mean, sure, there's things you can do on the moon that are interesting. I'm a fan of astronomical observatories on, for example. You know, and of course, it's going to be an interesting thing for geologists for whatever reason, get publications, that kind of stuff. But the, no, I'm being a little facetious there. There are things you can discover about the solar system's history by going to the moon. But I don't view the moon as really a place to settle. Mars, you know, except for the polar craters, water is only present on the moon in parts per million quantities. It's present everywhere on Mars at like 5% in the soil, and there are continent-sized regions where it's 60% in the soil, and there are glaciers that go as far south as 38 degrees north that are pure water ice. 38 north is the latitude of San Francisco. Okay, you know, then carbon. There's no carbon on the moon. Carbon dioxide is 95% of the Martian atmosphere. There's no nitrogen on the moon. It's 3% of Mars's atmosphere. There's no mineral ore on the moon. Mineral ore that is concentrations of particular things. I mean, yes, I showed that copper is geologically rare, except there are particular places on Earth where it's concentrated, which is why there was a Bronze Age. And that's because the Earth rather has had processes involving volcanism and water action and biological action that has concentrated geologically rare elements into usable ore. And much of that has occurred on Mars. It hasn't occurred on the moon. So the moon's made of trash rock. Mars has ore. Okay, we found salt deposits, for example. And Mars has a 24-hour day, which is what you want to grow plants, whereas the moon is 2 weeks of light, 2 weeks of dark. And Mars's atmosphere, as soon as it is, does mask out solar flares from the surface, which is also good. So Mars compares to the moon in the coming space age as North America compared to Greenland. This Greenland is closer to Europe than North America, and Europeans absolutely did reach it first. But it was not a place where you could really grow a full-fledged civilization in the way that you could in.
Right, thank you, Bob. Next question is from Terry Trevino. He said, you once mentioned an ideal location for our future Martian township. Has that changed? Or is it still, you kind of skipped by a map of Mars, I wasn't sure why, but he's wondering if you've changed your mind about it.
There's a lot of reasons to choose different places on Mars. There was a place that I identified as an ideal place for a first Martian mission, which was a place a bit north of the Valles Marineris, in which you had all sorts of interesting stuff within driving range. So that it was an ideal location to send an exploration mission to get the most science done. But in terms, I mean, look, if you go north on Mars, water becomes plentiful. At the equator, obviously, you have more solar incidence and less seasonal variability. In some of the highlands, you have with the volcanoes and so forth, you have more likely certain kinds of rich mineral ore. Once again, lower latitudes is gonna have more atmospheric, lower altitudes has more atmospheric shielding and in many cases more water as well. So there's pluses and minuses. I think that the different groups will choose different places on Mars for their own reasons, and there'll be a certain amount of trade between them. And so there's going to be an interest in creating systems for long distance transportation on Mars, including aviation systems that are adapted to that environment. I discussed that bit in the book, which you can get on it.
Thank you. We have another question.
Yeah, I actually have three things. First of all, is 3D printing a viable technology that will be used to develop civilization on Mars? Second, do you support the idea to nuke the polar ice caps on Mars to terraform it? And then third, after we have colonized Mars and are having societies there, what's the next place to go to?
The answer to your first question is yes, and your second question is no. That is 3D printing, of course, it's going to be, that's remembered by 3. Yeah, is absolutely going to be widely used on Mars. It's a terrific technology, and I think we're going to see further development to that technology beyond what we've been seeing so far, and it will absolutely be used. Nuking the caps, no, that won't work. You'd really have to do a lot of nuking to evaporate the air. And you'd be creating a lot of radioactive fallout, and it probably wouldn't do the job. The way to greenhouse Mars, the way to warm Mars is to, look, we know how to do global warming. Correct. We're developing considerable expertise in this area, and that's definitely the way to go. Except that, well, Mars already has CO2, but there are much more potent greenhouse gases than CO2 that we could manufacture artificially, fluorocarbons in particular, that could be used to very substantially warm Mars. So I believe the way to warm Mars is through atmospheric global warming done artificially and intentionally. The third question, what was the third question?
What's the next place to explore after Mars?
Well, I think the next place people will go after Mars, as I mentioned, is the asteroid belt. However, once again, I don't see individual asteroids as places where large populations could and communities could develop. I think that those would be mining outposts supported from Mars. So those are Mars's backyard, if you will. But here's the thing. Okay. Mars can be reached from Earth in 6 months using ballistic orbits. Okay. That is slightly accelerated Hohmann transfers. Okay. If you use orbits like that to go to the asteroid belt, either Earth or Mars, you're talking about like 2-year transfer kinds of things. Okay, so now, well, and while initial asteroid operations might be done exactly that way, there will be an incentive to use fusion propulsion to do that on powered orbits much faster. Okay, now this will then create capabilities for going to the outer solar system, but even interstellar expeditions. But the short answer to your question is it's an asteroid like that.
Thank you. Mark Henley has his hand up online. Mark, please.
Yeah, hi Bob. I don't know if you can hear me. I think so, hopefully.
I can hear you.
Yeah, good. Sorry I couldn't make it in person, but I just wondered what your thoughts are on the new NASA edicts to develop nuclear reactors and whether some effort should be put into breeders at this time.
Well, I'm not sure there really is a NASA nuclear reactor program. Okay, so in fact, I don't know if NASA has any direction at the moment. You want to know?
Okay.
But in answer to the question itself, No, in the short term, if we wanted to put a nuclear reactor on the moon or Mars, for instance, to support a program like Mars Direct, you need a 100 kilowatt reactor. It wouldn't be a breeder reactor. It would be a once-through reactor, but it would use highly enriched fuel. So basically, the fuel's already been bred. But that's very expensive fuel. And also it's highly controlled, which by the way, is a reason why that first human mission to Mars, the exploration program, is not doable by SpaceX by itself. It needs to be a public-private partnership because these sorts of materials, highly enriched uranium, are weapons-grade materials. They are tightly controlled. And so we're going to need a public-private partnership to enable the human exploration of Mars, even if we have one that is led by SpaceX or
Okay, Oleg, you see, he has his hand up online as well.
Hello.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your talk. I had two questions. As a PhD student at WPI who works on reentry systems, with the application for Mars atmospheric reentry, I wanted to just ask what are the main unsolved problems and how you see the novel technologies in terms of reentry being applied for the colonization purposes, because the existing capsules are pushing the limits of the reentry technology. So I just wanted to ask your opinion on what comes next and what are the main challenges of the reentry and entry, descent, and landing systems. And my second question is on artificial intelligence and how does the rapid development of AI fits in the described colonization plans and concepts. If we achieve so-called artificial global intelligence, everyone is talking about how it will affect the colonization in case the AGI and deep automation significantly changes the way society operates, functions, values, and purposes. Thank you very much again for your talk and for the answers.
Okay, now, reentry technologies. I think we need to do things that lower the ballistic coefficient. And there's a number of options here. One is balloons and flex fabric aero brakes. Another is to go Musk's way, which you have a rather large vehicle, large compared to its weight. Once again, lowering its ballistic coefficient. Look, if you can re-enter from Earth at 8 kilometers a second, if they can develop the Starship to be able to do re-entry, okay, that's 8 kilometers a second. The entry velocity at Mars from a trans-Mars injection orbit is only 6 kilometers a second, or 6.5. So it should be able to do it. Now, so there's a number of different possible approaches. Now, your other question is a pretty deep question. It's one that everybody's wondering about right now. Now, because people sometimes think, that we're going to deal with the Terminator soon and all that, or whatever, the internet AGI God controlling everything.
Well, we are in LA and it is California, so we have both Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, yeah, right. Well, first of all, look, AI is definitely part of the future. Now, whether you're going to have artificial, whatever it's general intelligence, I guess they call it, AGI. I don't know about that. That's a thing. I take a more optimistic. Okay. I view artificial intelligence as a tool. Okay. I view it as a way for people to expand their abilities. Okay, just like any other tool is a way to expand your abilities. Okay. You have a knife, you can cut something you can't tear apart with your hands. Okay. If you have a pen and paper, you can remember things that you can't do just with your mind by itself. And so forth. And obviously communications technologies allow you to talk to people much further than your voice connection, et cetera, et cetera. Now, there's going to be an extreme labor shortage on Mars. And an ideal technology that would be AI related for Mars would be an app that allows anyone to do anything. Or almost anyone to do almost. I mean, so, you know, I mean, just think about what this would mean for you in your house. Your washing machine breaks down. You don't know whether it can be fixed or not. Instead of calling the handyman, you just know how to do it. So, but whether it's fixing a broken washing machine or a broken life support system or designing a better, in other words, an app that would greatly expand the capacities of people is exactly what Mars needs, to allow anyone to do anything or almost anyone to do almost anything. And obviously, any such app would be of tremendous utility to people on Earth. It would make us all much more capable and productive. That's what I hope AI will be, that AI will not be the enemy of people, that AI will be a tool in people's hands. Now, there are some dangers in this, obviously, because like any new tool, it will fall into certain people's hands before others. Now, in our own lifetimes, we saw this like with cell phones. Okay, originally cell phones were very expensive. Now not so much. But so that did not cause a societal crisis. Now I'm saying artificial intelligence. I mean, this was Musk's argument in making AI open. I'm not sure that was a completely correct strategy, but that was his argument. It has some virtue to make sure that it is not a monopoly of the few. In any case, that's what we got. But yes, there's all sorts of doomsday scenarios you hear about AI that, you know, AI certainly will make certain professions obsolete. That's not such a bad thing. When I was a kid, there were people who worked as elevator operators. You go into a building and there'd be somebody whose job there was to take you to the floor you needed to go to. Now those people are all gone. You just push the button. The gas station attendants are gone too, actually.
Except in New Jersey.
Yeah, except in New Jersey. But it makes us more productive and more rich, actually, if we don't have to waste time doing things that can be done easily by automated systems.
So Bob, I think we have time for one last question. John Dreza asked online, could you comment on the potential of Venus with its extremely rich resources and energy to benefit the near-term evolution of human development?
Well, I'm not a big Venus fan. There are people who have pointed out that you could have floating colonies in Venus's atmosphere, and actually at the level where the atmospheric pressure is about 1 bar, the temperatures are fairly clement. You know, they're not ultra hot or ultra cold, they're just nice, you just float around there in aerostat city, floating on Venus, but I'm not exactly sure what the point is. Be very difficult to explore the resources of Venus's surface. And I don't think the view of this, I guess at the 1 bar height, the atmosphere would be about as clear as it is here. I'm not sure about that. But I just don't see it.
All right, well, thank you very much, Bob. Let's dream do. So I'm delighted to present you with this certificate.
Mars.
It doesn't last any time.
All right. Oh, and once again, Mars Society Convention is gonna be here in Los Angeles, University of Southern California, October 9th through 11th. You can register online straight away. It's marssociety.org.
Show the book one last time.
And then this book, you can get on Amazon, and those books you can get here right now, $20 each. Case for Nukes and Case for Mars.
All right, thanks again, Bob.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
Were you saying? Totally.
Yes.
Or, again, I heard somebody behind me say.
I didn't say it, but I like having.